Here is the completed carving on its backing board. I'll tell you about the backing board later, but I hope you can see the perspective that I've been trying to get, that you're looking down on the snail a little bit, even though it's vertical on the wall, the carving. I'm going to leave this as a natural wood, just waxing it. I had thought about colouring it, but I like that so much. The shell I'm going to bleach, and let me show you a carving that I had bleached earlier, a few years ago. This is the same wood. This has been oiled here, and this has been bleached. This is the same wood as this, lime wood. And I think you can see it's quite stunning, quite different. And you can still see the grain in there, and that the fact it is wood, it's not painted. And that's the difference between painting and bleaching. Now, if I didn't want to bleach this, if I intended just to leave that as a piece of ordinary wood, I've given myself quite a big problem, and I did it because I knew I was going to bleach. But here's the problem. If I just show you it here, can you see? As soon as I do anything with this, and this is just water on the rag, with this here, I'm going to get that colour change really strongly on the join. And whilst I don't mind joining wood up, one of the problems is that that join should not be so noticeable. So ideally that would be one piece of wood, or I should have glued it up in a slightly different way. So let me tell you exactly what's gone on here. Here is a piece of the original lime wood that I used for gluing up the snail. If I turn it end on like this, you can see that here is the centre of the tree. You can actually see the middle of the tree here. So all the rings are coming around like this. So what this means is that this bit of the wood, this top part here, is what they call heartwood. And this bit further away towards the outside of the tree, that's sapwood. That's a lighter colour. This is a darker colour, almost always. So what I've got going on here is a dark here, going to lighter at this side of the board. So imagine this piece of paper is my plank of wood before I sawed it up. So one half here is dark, nearer the centre of the tree. One half is light, nearer the outside of the tree. And what I did was this. I sawed off a piece of the wood, like that, and I put it here like this. So I'm putting dark against light. That's what I did. I did it cavalierly because I knew I was going to bleach and it didn't really matter. But if I'd thought about it, it wouldn't have made any difference. What I could have done was this. I could have reversed this and put dark to dark, in which case I've got a much less obvious join. Similarly, you can also put light to light. It wouldn't make any difference. But you see the principle. So when you've got a big piece of wood like this, think about flipping it over when you make the join like that. This is the bleach I use. It comes in two parts, usefully labelled Part A and Part B. Essentially we put this on, wait 10 minutes, then we put this part on. We don't want to mix them, so I will use bottles to dip out of them rather than just dipping into the pot itself. They do go off, so make sure you're using a fresh amount of that product. So I put the Part A in here, just a little bit, and then I'm going to start at the edges of the snail shell, like so, and I'm going to make sure that I paint very carefully without too much liquid in the brush, right down to the body of the snail, so along here, very carefully. If I manage to get the bleach onto the body here eventually, I can recut that, so that's why I wanted to do this first. But you could use masking tape across here, but I tend not to. So we'll go around the edge and then with a bigger brush fill in here. And you can see it soaks in very readily, and you see how it makes this immediately darker. I mean, it's quite disconcerting the way this goes dark first of all, but that's quite normal. So I'm going to put this all over the shell, soaking in really a lot here. Wait 10 minutes and I'll come back with the other one, the part B. I've labelled the bottle A for part A, and I've also now washed my brushes so they're clean, because I don't want the part B to be contaminating part A. You do need to keep them separate, except on the wood. So everything's washed. I've got a new lot of part B here, which is a sort of peroxide based liquid, I think, and I'm going to now go over this surface, the part A, in exactly the same way, but with this part B. So around the edges first, very carefully, not too much liquid, and then in here, around here, and then when I've gone round the edges, just as before, make sure every part is covered, and then I leave this for 2 hours this time at least, and just see what happens. I usually leave it overnight, and that gives me a good idea of how the reaction has happened. But at least 2 hours before you can see what's going on. And it does look awfully brown, doesn't it? It looks very dark, but that does change, so don't be put off by that. Here we are 2 hours later, and you can see that everything's been bleached, but there's still a bit of a difference between this part of the carving and this. So what I'm going to do is put a second coat of bleach on this area here. About 10 minutes ago I applied part A to this part of the carving here, and it's now actually gone quite dry. Remember, again, I'll just emphasize this, that this liquid, this part A, as I put it on and dipped back in, I've collected some of the part B, which is on the surface anyway. So you do want to keep these separate, so keep them in a little bit of jar and don't return this liquid to the main container. This is to be thrown away, disposed of. So now I put on my part B onto this area here, again quite neatly, look up to the edge. It's going dark, that's normal, and then I come back in about 2 hours time, couple of hours. That will hopefully have gone down to match this shade here. If not, I'll put a third coat on and I'll keep working it until I get them all roughly uniform, or all the surfaces roughly the same sort of bleached amount. So there you go. And you can see down here where I've got some leakage onto the carving. What I'll do is when it's all finished, I will just skim that off with a chisel and re-stamp that area to make sure that's nice and tidy. When you're happy with the state of the bleaching, you can seal the surface either with a simple white polish, which is shellac, a blonde shellac, or, as I prefer to do, use an artist's acrylic medium. So this will seal it, and if you wanted to paint the snail afterwards, you could certainly paint over this surface easily. So just to seal that and keep that blondness in there. And I can see as I do it, I can see the grain of the wood showing through, so it's definitely not painted at this stage. Finishing off with strokes in one direction. The acrylic varnish is dry. I forgot to mention that I also put it on the back of the carving to seal it as well. So I'm now left with just the snail itself, and for that I'm going to use my wax mixture, which you can see me make elsewhere on the site. It's a fairly thin mix because there's lots of little crevices. So it's a bit noisy, but it's what I've done in other projects. I put the wax on, and then I melt it with a hairdryer, and I start taking excess off with the rag. So wax on. So here's the snail, and I think you can see there's some lovely colour in here, and then it goes quite smooth over there. That's one coat of wax. I'll let that go off, let that dry. It's a little bit tacky at the moment, so I don't have to be touching it. I'll put a second coat on, and then I'm left with assembling the backboards here and then fitting the snail to those. So I'll show you about the backboards now. This is the backing board without the snail, and these are the screws that come in from the back to hold the snail. You can see that I've joined up a series of boards getting narrower as they go into the distance. That's to do with the perspective. You know, things that are wide will get narrower as they get further away. So let me just turn this around. And here again, those are the screws going through to hold the snail. I've not joined the boards up with glue. I've left them quite rough, and I've recessed a strip of wood into the back of the boards and then simply screwed them in place. That means the boards can move around. These are quite loose, quite big screw holes, so it won't warp, and this will keep it quite fixed. The other thing I did, of course, which you can see, is I've cut the ends like so, not equally, to give more of that perspective going to a vanishing point. And I've left the surface fairly rough, as I say, to give that sort of older look. Just ran a belt sander over that. I've made a decision to darken these boards a little bit, so I'm going to use my normal linseed oil turpentine mix. So this is raw linseed oil in the jar here, and I've added 10% of mineral spirit, white spirit. You could use turpentine, very similar effect. And I've mixed this together in this pot, and I'm just going to brush it on. Brush it down into that crack there. Leave it a few minutes just to soak in, and then I'll take off excess with a cloth, and then I'll just leave that to dry, and probably just one coat will do. And I'll do front and back as well. Here's the finished carving assembled. I think it works very well. I like the different colours. I like the texture versus the plain. I like the straight lines versus the curves. So quite an interesting carving that I'm really pleased with.